They were buried alive under a sun that showed no mercy. 3 federal rangers, bound and helpless, half swallowed by the burning sand. No water, no shade, no chance of survival. The desert was already starting to claim them, but just as their world dissolved into a white-hot haze, a shadow cut through the heat. Not a rescue chopper, not a search party. It was a wild horse. What happened next defied all logic. It shattered our understanding of the animal kingdom, and it would leave an entire nation absolutely stunned. Before we dive into one of the most incredible rescue stories you will ever hear, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you believe in the impossible, don't forget to subscribe. The sun over the Blackhorn Desert wasn't a friend. It wasn't golden or warm. It was a white-hot killer, a blinding disk in the sky that bleached the world of all its color. The air itself shimmered, turning the horizon into a wavering, watery line. Everything looked like a mirage. The ground, a cracked and broken puzzle of sun-baked clay, felt brittle enough to shatter under a boot. The wind wasn't a relief. It was a blast furnace, slapping hot gusts of red dust across the flats. Each grain of sand stung like a tiny shard of glass against exposed skin. The only smell was dust and hot minerals, a dry, sharp scent that scraped the back of your throat with every breath. It was the kind of day that drove even the insects into hiding. The only thing that moved was the heat itself, rising in shimmering ribbons from the sand. But 3 figures were moving through that desolate landscape. Their shapes were distorted by the heat, making them look like ghosts the desert hadn't decided whether to keep or erase. Leading the way was Elena Marlowe. She was 38, with dark hair pulled into a tight braid that snaked down her back. After nearly 2 decades as a ranger, she moved with a taut, efficient grace. Her eyes, sharp and steady, constantly scanned the land ahead, cataloging every ridge, every shadow, every sign that was out of place. She knew this desert, and she knew it didn't forgive mistakes. Behind her was Cole Hart, 32, his skin tanned to the color of old leather. He was the kind of man who could crack a joke in the face of a dust storm and hit a target from 300 yards without breaking a sweat. His hat was tilted back, revealing a spray of freckles across his nose. He let out a low whistle, a sound that was immediately swallowed by the immense silence. Bringing up the rear was Maya Ortiz. At 26, she was the rookie, only 6 months into her career with the Nevada Wildlife Enforcement Service. She still had that idealistic shine in her eyes, the belief that good always won and the rules always made sense. Her binoculars bounced against her hip as she adjusted them for the 100th time, trying to see everything at once. They weren't just taking a walk. They were on a trail, faint tire tracks in the sand, a piece of rusted cable snagged on a bush, a tuft of animal hair caught on thorns. It was a poacher's breadcrumb trail, and Elena knew from experience that trails like this always led to something ugly. "This way," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She veered toward a cut in the terrain, a shallow canyon where 2 low ridges funneled together. As they entered the narrow pass, the wind dropped, and the silence pressed in, heavy and absolute. Cole crouched, examining the ground. "Truck came through here, not long ago either. The wind hasn't wiped it clean." "An hour? 2?" Maya asked, her voice tight with anticipation. Cole shrugged. "Give or take, but they're still ahead of us." Elena was already moving again, her eyes locked on the faint lines in the sand. The canyon walls rose on either side, just high enough to block the horizon. She was so focused on the tracks, so deep in the hunt, that she didn't see the shadow shift behind them. Not until it was far too late. A figure stepped into the gap they had just walked through, blocking their only way out. "Drop the radios. Hands where I can see 'em." The voice was rough, like gravel soaked in whiskey. Elena turned slowly. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her face remained a mask of calm. 10 feet away stood Troy Callahan. He was a piece of weathered timber, lean but hard, with cold, pale eyes that held no hint of humanity. A snake tattoo coiled around his wrist, its fangs resting right over his pulse. He held a short-barreled shotgun, its muzzle pointed low but ready. Cole straightened up, spreading his fingers slowly. "Easy there, friend. We can just talk about this." "Don't call me friend," Troy snarled. "Radios, now." Maya's hand twitched toward her sidearm. It was a rookie mistake, a move born of fear and training. Elena gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "Don't." She reached for her own radio, her thumb finding the transmit button. "Dry Creek Base, this is—" The shotgun swung up. Troy lunged forward and kicked the radio from her hand. It skittered across the sand, the connection dead. "I said drop it!" He closed the distance in 3 long strides, pulling a coil of nylon rope from his belt. One by one, he wrenched their hands behind their backs, cinching the rope so tight it bit into their skin, cutting off the blood flow. Cole tried to shield Maya, a protective instinct, but a brutal jab from the shotgun stock sent him stumbling into the canyon wall, gasping for air. Troy was efficient. He stripped them of everything. Sidearms, knives, radios, canteens. Every tool they carried, every drop of water they had, landed in a growing pile in the dust. "Move," he ordered. The boredom in his voice was more terrifying than rage. He herded them up a low slope. At the top of the ridge, they saw it, a shallow pit, already dug into the sand, waiting for them. "Down." Elena dropped to her knees without a word, her mind racing, searching for an opening, a weakness, anything. Cole followed, his jaw tight with fury. Maya's breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. She was trying not to cry, trying not to show him her terror. Troy planted his shotgun in the sand and picked up a shovel, and then he began to bury them, slowly, methodically. He threw sand into the pit, the soft hiss of it covering their boots, then their legs. Elena stared straight ahead, her face a neutral mask, refusing to give him the satisfaction of her fear. Cole muttered a curse, but a spray of sand silenced him. Maya squeezed her eyes shut, trying to control her breathing as the weight pressed in, rising to her knees, her waist, her ribs. The sun beat down. The desert didn't care. When the sand reached their armpits, pinning their arms tight against their sides, Troy stopped. He tossed the shovel into the pit. "I'm gonna let you breathe," he said, the words a casual, cruel promise. "For a while." He dusted off his hands and looked down at them, 3 heads sticking out of the ground. The wind scattered loose sand over their shoulders, into their hair, into the corners of their mouths. "You meddle in my business," he said softly. "You die in my office." He let the silence stretch, then turned and walked away. A moment later, the sound of a truck engine coughed to life, roared, and then faded into the vast, empty distance. They were alone, buried alive. The heat closed in like a fist. The sun was a relentless hammer, and every gust of wind was a blast from a furnace, driving more sand into their faces. Elena's lips were already cracked. Swallowing felt like dragging sandpaper down her throat. Cole's breathing was too fast. Maya's head was drooping, her lashes crusted with grit. Elena stared at the shimmering horizon, her mind clinging to a single, desperate thought. Someone will see us. Someone has to see us. But out here, in the heart of the Blackhorn Desert, there was no one to see, no one to hear them. The desert was preparing to close over them, to erase them so completely it would be like they had never existed at all. And the clock was ticking. The hours passed like a slow, grinding torture. The sun climbed to its peak, a merciless white eye in the sky, turning the air into a visible, rippling wave of heat. The glare was so intense that just keeping your eyes open was an act of defiance. Elena's breaths were shallow, each one dragging scorching air into her lungs. Sand clung to her sweaty eyelashes, scraping her skin every time she blinked. Cole's lips were cracked and white with salt. He had narrowed his eyes to tiny slits, trying to fight off the blinding light. Maya's chin sagged against her chest, her body starting to surrender, but every few moments she would force her head back up, a silent refusal to give in completely. Their tongues were swollen and felt like scorched leather. There was no moisture left in their mouths. The wind was a constant torment, hissing in their ears, whipping tiny cyclones of sand against their faces. There were no other sounds. No engines, no birds, no hope. And then Elena saw something. Through the shimmering heat on the horizon, a disturbance. A shape. No, several shapes. At first, she dismissed them as a mirage, a cruel trick played by a sun-addled brain. But the movement was too real, too deliberate. She squinted, her temples aching from the strain. They were moving closer. They were horses. A herd of wild mustangs, 7 or 8 of them, glided across the sand with an effortless grace. But Elena knew it wasn't effortless. Every step in this heat was a cost, a drain on precious energy. Yet they moved with a calm confidence, as if the desert bent to their will. The heat blurred their outlines, but their colors were distinct. A deep chestnut, a horse the color of obsidian, 2 pale buckskins that seemed to glow in the harsh light. But her eyes were drawn to the one at the front, the lead mare. She emerged from the heat haze like a ghost solidifying into reality. Her coat was a smoky gray, dappled with soft patterns that caught the light. Her mane was long and tangled, whipped by the endless wind. And on her left flank, an old scar ran for several inches, a pale, permanent mark of survival. Her eyes were large and dark, intelligent and alert. There was no softness in them, only the steady, calculating gaze of a creature that knew the difference between a threat to fight and a threat to avoid. She moved like she was part of the land itself. The rest of the herd followed her lead, mirroring her pace. Then, about 200 yards away, the lead mare stopped dead. Her head shot up, her ears swiveled like radar dishes, catching sounds the rangers couldn't hear. Her nostrils flared, tasting the air. The wind carried the scent of dust and dry brush, but it also carried something else, something that didn't belong, the scent of human sweat, the scent of fear. She stood perfectly still, every muscle coiled. Elena held her breath. The mare's ears tilted toward them, then away, then back again. Seconds stretched into an eternity. Then, with a sudden, decisive movement, the mare stepped away from her herd. She didn't run. She didn't retreat. She began walking in a diagonal line straight toward the pit. The rest of the herd stayed behind, watching, their heads held high. Her pace was slow, cautious. Her hooves slid in the loose sand, but she never faltered. Her gaze was locked on the 3 human heads sticking out of the earth. When she was about 15 feet away, she stopped again. She lowered her head, her muzzle nearly touching the ground, drawing in long, deep breaths. She was reading them, analyzing the scent, processing the impossible scene in front of her. Elena didn't move. Cole didn't dare breathe. Maya felt a tiny, fragile bubble of hope rise in her chest, the first feeling other than terror she'd had since Troy drove away. A single wrong move, a single sound, could shatter this moment and send the horse bolting back into the empty desert. The mare closed the final distance, walking as if on a tightrope. Wild horses are supposed to avoid humans. They are supposed to flee from the scent of fear. They are hardwired to avoid treacherous, collapsing ground like this. But this horse, this smoky gray mare, was breaking all the rules. She stopped just a few feet from Elena. Up close, Elena could see that her eyes were as dark and deep as a midnight sky. She wanted to say something, to offer a word of comfort, but her throat was too dry, her tongue too swollen. The mare dipped her head suddenly. And then she did something that made no sense at all. She planted her front hoof in the sand, right next to Elena's buried shoulder. Not with panic, not with aggression, but with deliberate precision. She hooked the edge of her hoof into the packed sand and swept it away, carving a clean trough. A sheet of grit tumbled off Elena's shoulder. The weight lessened instantly. Elena could feel a strange coolness where the sand had been, a small pocket of relief. She managed to drag in a slightly deeper breath. The mare swept her hoof again. This time she loosened the sand that was pinning Elena's upper arm, releasing the crushing pressure. More sand slid down, and Elena felt a new, incredible sensation: space. A few more millimeters for her ribs to expand, for her lungs to fill. It wasn't freedom, not yet, but it was air. Good, Elena rasped, the word a painful, broken sound. Good girl, keep going. The mare paused. She lifted her head and looked directly into Elena's eyes, holding her gaze for a long, silent moment. It felt like a conversation without words, an understanding that transcended species. Then, as if making a decision, she stepped back. She moved over to Cole. Instead of digging, she nudged his shoulder with her muzzle. It was a firm, solid bump that sent a tremor through the sand around him, dislodging a crust of hardened grit. He blinked, a face full of gray mane, and tried to laugh. The sound that came out was a dry, cracking croak. Not the kind of rescue I was expecting, he muttered, his voice hoarse. The mare snorted, a gust of hot air across his cheek, as if to confirm he was still alive. Then she moved on to Maya. Maya's head was drooping again, her body on the verge of giving up. The mare lowered her long neck until her nose was just an inch from Maya's cheek. She exhaled, a long, deliberate breath. The warm air ruffled the sand on Maya's face, shaking a few grains loose from her eyelashes. There was no response. The mare breathed again, stronger this time, a warm, insistent push. Maya's eyelids fluttered. They peeled open, and she found herself staring into the dark, bottomless eyes of the wild horse. "Mom?" she whispered, the word a delirious reflex. The mare took a step back, taking in the three of them again. A quick, silent inventory. It felt like she was making a calculation, weighing the situation. The hopelessness that had been a suffocating blanket began to lift. The sun was still a hammer. The thirst was still a fire in their throats. But something had changed. There was a new sound in their heads, faint but insistent, like the distant drumming of hoofbeats. Hope. But then, the mare did the last thing they expected. She lifted her head, flicked an ear toward the horizon where her herd waited, and turned away. She took one step, then another, her strides lengthening. In seconds, she was a gray ripple in the heat, galloping away, disappearing back into the shimmering haze of the dunes. She was gone. She had given them a taste of hope, a single breath of air, and then she had abandoned them. The relief that had flooded Elena's chest curdled into a hard knot of despair. Maybe it had all been a trick of the light, a hallucination. "Probably went to get a friend," Cole said, his voice trying for a joke but landing somewhere near a prayer. He stared at the empty spot on the ridge where she had vanished, daring the desert to prove him wrong. The sand began to slide back into the small spaces the horse had cleared, the desert reclaiming its territory. The brief moment of hope was gone, swallowed by the crushing reality of their situation. It was worse now. They had been given a reason to live, only to have it snatched away. Elena closed her eyes, sheltering them from the grit and the despair. This was it. This was the end. But then she heard it. A sound that wasn't the wind. It started as a low murmur, a soft thrumming that she felt in her chest as much as she heard with her ears. It grew steadier, closer, a rhythm older than words. Hoofbeats. On the crest of the nearest dune, a gray silhouette appeared against the blinding glare of the sky. It was her, Sierra. That was the name that flashed into Elena's mind, a name for their savior. And she was not alone. Two other horses stepped into view beside her, a rich chestnut with a white blaze down his face, and a pale cream mare whose coat shimmered like gold in the sun. The three of them moved down the slope together, spreading out as they approached, forming a wide protective triangle around the pit. They stopped as one, ears forward, eyes bright, watching. Then they went to work. Sierra came straight to Elena. The chestnut moved to Cole. The cream mare went to Maya. It was as if they had a plan, as if assignments had been made at the top of the dune. Sierra began to dig again, but this time there was no hesitation. Her hoof was a powerful, precise tool, scooping and sweeping, cutting through the compacted sand and sending it flying. With each pass, more of Elena's arm and shoulder was freed. The nylon rope, a bright, ugly line against her sunburnt skin, was now visible. When the sand threatened to slide back in, Sierra adjusted her technique, using faster, shorter strokes, like a master excavator bracing a trench. The chestnut at Cole's side was just as determined. He wasn't as precise as Sierra, but he was powerful, his hooves pounding at the sand that was crushing Cole's chest. He would work for a few moments, then pause, letting the sand settle, and then go at it again, a relentless, rhythmic assault. The cream mare working on Maya was different. She used her muzzle first, nudging and pushing, tossing away the sand that had crept up to Maya's throat. Where the sand was too heavy, she used her forehoof, striking in short, careful beats, always mindful not to get too close to Maya's skin. The sound of it, the scrape of hooves, the soft collapse of sand, the heavy breathing of the horses, became a strange and beautiful symphony. It was the sound of a miracle. The heat was still brutal, but the horses' work created a small pocket of psychological shade, a space where panic couldn't take root. Elena could feel her ribs moving more freely. Air, precious air, was finding its way back into her lungs. Cole managed a full, deep breath and let it out as a pained laugh. Maya's eyes, which had been closed, slowly opened, and she whispered something that no one, not even the horses, could hear. "Good," Elena managed to say when Sierra paused to check her progress. "Good. Keep going." The words were absurd. She was giving orders to a wild animal that was saving her life, but they felt necessary. Sierra's ear twitched. For a moment she looked almost offended, as if to say, "Of course I'm going to keep going." And then she dug again. Cole flexed his shoulder, feeling the sudden absence of pressure. "Hold what they give you," he croaked to Maya. It was the only strategy they had. Minutes blurred. The horses worked in a coordinated, tireless cycle. Dig, pause, readjust. Sand flew. The sun inched across the sky. The three rangers who had been helpless victims pinned beneath the earth were becoming people again. Breathing, shifting, reclaiming their bodies from the crushing weight that had been meant to be their tomb. Sierra cut a trench so deep that Elena could finally tip her shoulder forward. The motion sent a cascade of sand down her back instead of into her face. She coughed, a hard, racking sound, and then coughed again, just to prove to herself that she could. When she opened her eyes, Sierra was right there, so close Elena could see the tiny grains of sand caught in the mare's whiskers. The chestnut's final, powerful sweep of his hoof freed Cole's chest completely. He sucked in air through his teeth, wincing, then grinned up at the big red horse. "Thanks, partner," he breathed. The horse just flicked an ear and snorted, unimpressed by the gratitude. The cream mare blew softly into Maya's hair, then stepped back, assessing her work with an intelligent, focused gaze. "Good girl," Elena said, her voice raw with emotion. Keep going." Sierra's nostrils flared. She didn't need the encouragement, but she seemed to accept it. She dug once more, a swift, sure stroke, and for the first time since Troy Callahan had driven away, the three rangers knew they weren't going to die. Not today. A new story was being written, one where the laws of the wild had bent toward mercy, where instinct had chosen compassion. The desert was still a killer. But today, three of its wildest children had decided to fight back, and inch by hard-won inch, they were winning. Sierra worked until Elena's entire upper body was free from the crushing weight. She could move her arms, twist her torso. The ropes were still tight, but she could breathe. The other horses had done the same for Cole and Maya. They were exhausted, dehydrated, but they were no longer buried. They were sitting in a pit, surrounded by their saviors. The mare lingered for a moment, her nostrils flaring, as if memorizing the scent of them, the shape of the air. Then she lifted her head, her gaze fixed on the northern horizon. A decision was made. She turned. With a powerful surge of muscle, she launched into a full gallop. The gray shape became an arrow, slicing through the heat shimmer, her mane streaming behind her like smoke. She ran alone, leaving the rest of her herd behind, as if on a mission that only she could complete. She moved with an impossible speed and certainty, leaping dry creek beds, weaving through stands of Joshua trees. Sweat darkened her coat, but her pace never faltered. Her mind was locked on a single target, a place she knew from a distance, a place that smelled of hay, leather, and humans, a place where voices could travel farther than a shout. Dry Creek Ranger Station. 6 miles away, Jonah Pike was cinching the strap on his saddle. At 45, he was as lean and weathered as the landscape he patrolled. 20 years in the desert had taught him to trust his gut and to expect the unexpected. He heard the hoofbeats before he saw the horse. The sound was wrong. It wasn't one of his station horses. It was faster, more urgent, a frantic drumbeat rolling toward him. Jonah turned, shielding his eyes from the glare. And he saw her, a smoky gray mare, barreling down the dirt track, her sides heaving. She slid to a stop 20 feet away, every line of her body screaming with urgency. Jonah's training kicked in. Wild horse. Don't approach too fast. Don't make any sudden moves. But it wasn't her wildness that seized his attention. It was the flash of orange. Tangled in her mane was a torn, frayed strip of fluorescent tape, a ranger's reflective strip, the kind they wore on their vests, the kind that had no business being on a wild Mustang unless it had been ripped off in a struggle. Jonah's blood ran cold. He knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that this was not just a horse. This was a message. "Where'd you get that?" he asked, his voice low. The mare didn't answer with words. She looked past him, back toward the southern desert she had just crossed. Then she stamped her front hoof. Once, twice, 3 times. The movements were sharp, deliberate, an unmistakable signal. 3. Her ears swiveled back to him, as if to ask, "Did you get it? Do you understand?" Jonah understood. 3 rangers, in trouble. He took a slow step forward. The mare didn't flinch. He looked south to the broken, shimmering expanse of the Blackhorn. Something that had been a vague unease all morning hardened into cold, sharp dread. "All right," he murmured, as much to himself as to her. "You lead. We'll follow." He moved with a speed born of years of crisis. He grabbed a sling and packed only what mattered: 2 large jugs of water, a folding shovel, a shortwave radio, a first aid kit. He buckled on his sidearm, checked the magazine out of habit, and swung into his saddle. His own horse, a sturdy gelding named Dusty, was ready. Jonah looked at the gray mare. She took 3 steps back, whirled, and broke into a steady, powerful lope. It wasn't a desperate sprint, but a pace designed for a partner, a pace that said, "Keep up. This is important." Jonah and Dusty fell in behind her. The station vanished in the heat haze. The world narrowed to the rhythmic pounding of hooves and the dark, guiding arrow of the mare's tail. She led him through treacherous deep sand, finding paths of firm ground that were invisible to the human eye. She guided him through narrow slot canyons and thorny brush, always looking back, always making sure he was still with her. It was the most incredible act of guidance he had ever witnessed. After what felt like an eternity, the terrain began to look familiar. And then he saw it, a place where the ground looked wrong, churned up, like a fresh wound on the face of the desert. Sierra slowed. Jonah pulled Dusty to a halt and swung down from the saddle. He flicked his folding shovel open and ran toward the pit. The scene that greeted him was a nightmare. 3 of his own, sitting in a shallow grave, their faces caked with dust, their lips cracked and bleeding. The sand around them had been cleared, but it was obvious what had happened here. He went to Elena first. She was the most alert. He started digging, not at her, but above her, creating a trench to keep the sand from sliding back in. He worked with his hands, his fingers clawing at the packed earth. "Got you," he said, his voice tight. "Let go," he told the sand. He braced his feet and pulled. It took 3 powerful heaves to break the sand's grip and lift her upper body free. She gasped for air, her lungs seizing in a series of racking coughs. "In through your nose," Jonah commanded, his voice calm and steady. "Small sips of air. Don't panic." As he lowered her to the ground, Sierra moved in, planting herself at Elena's side. She lowered her head and breathed softly into Elena's hair, a strange, comforting presence in the midst of chaos. He moved to Cole next, then to Maya, digging with a desperate, focused energy. With each one he freed, Sierra was there, nudging, breathing, offering a silent, steady support that was both baffling and profoundly moving. When they were all out, he grabbed a water jug. He didn't let them drink freely. He knew that in their state, they could easily choke or make themselves sick. He poured a tiny amount into the cap and gave it to Elena. Her hands shook as she lifted it to her lips. Then he gave some to Cole and then to Maya. It was warm, but it was water. It was life. Jonah checked their pulses. Elena's was fast but strong. Cole's was thready. Maya's was quick and weak. He logged the information in his head. "We got a guard dog," Cole croaked, jerking his chin toward the mare. "I'll put it in the report," Jonah said, already pulling out his radio. "Unconventional assets." He pressed the transmit button. "Dry Creek Base, this is Pike. I have 3 Rangers in Blackhorn. They are alive. I repeat, they are alive. Severe dehydration and heat exhaustion. Request immediate ambulance and prep for medevac." The reply crackled through. "Copy, Pike. Ambulance is rolling. ETA 15 minutes. He read off the coordinates. As he clipped the radio back to his belt, he looked at the gray mare. "You did good," he said quietly. Sierra just tipped an ear, as if to say it was all in a day's work. She remained at Elena's side, a silent, powerful guardian. "He buried us," Elena said, her voice raspy but clear. "Callahan, he'll be back for his traps. He'll be back to make sure we're dead." Jonah nodded grimly. "We'll be ready for him." But as he tended to their immediate needs, wetting gauze to clean their faces, propping up jackets for a sliver of shade, a new, shocking twist was about to unfold. The rescue was over, but the fight for justice was just beginning, and it would hinge on something no one, not even Jonah, could have predicted. Maya was propped against the sandy slope, the world still a blurry, ringing haze. Jonah had handed her the water cap again, and she took a slow, deliberate sip. As she lifted a shaky hand to wipe the grit from her collar, her fingers brushed against something hard and flat, hidden inside a small, sealed pocket on the inner lining of her uniform shirt. Her eyes widened. The exhaustion and dehydration were momentarily forgotten, replaced by a jolt of pure adrenaline. "The drive," she whispered, the words coming out cracked but whole. Elena and Cole turned their heads toward her. Jonah paused, his attention captured by the sudden change in her voice. Maya fumbled with the pocket, her fingers clumsy. She pulled the object free and held it up. It was a small, dust-caked, waterproof USB drive, the kind they used in their trail cameras. She'd grabbed it from a camera they'd set up just minutes before the ambush. In the chaos, as Troy Callahan had disarmed them, she had managed to shove it into the hidden pocket, a desperate last-ditch effort. A Hail Mary. "It's all here," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Everything." Jonah crouched beside her. He took the drive and pulled a rugged field tablet from his saddlebag. He wiped the screen, slotted the USB into the port, and held his breath. A folder appeared on the screen. He tapped the most recent file. A video began to play. The footage was chilling. The camera's high angle captured the entire scene. It showed the three of them walking into the narrow pass. It showed Troy Callahan stepping out from behind the rocks, shotgun in hand. It showed him disarming them, binding them, forcing them into the pit. The camera recorded without emotion or judgment as he shoveled sand over their bodies until only their heads were visible. It was irrefutable, damning proof. "Attempted murder," Jonah said softly, his voice a low growl. "We got him." But that wasn't all that was on the drive. He scrubbed forward to the next time-stamped file. The camera had been triggered again, this time by motion and heat. The new video began. It showed the three of them, helpless in the pit. And then, from the edge of the frame, a horse appeared. Sierra. The camera had captured it all. Her cautious approach, her initial, tentative digging, her sudden departure that had felt like a betrayal, and then her triumphant return with two other horses. They watched, mesmerized, as the footage showed the three Mustangs working together with an intelligence that seemed impossible. The gray mare digging at Elena's side, the chestnut working on Cole, the cream mare nudging the sand away from Maya's face. It was a coordinated, deliberate rescue operation performed by wild animals, on camera. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the hiss of the wind, both outside and on the video. Jonah finally exhaled. "I have never," he said, shaking his head in disbelief, "seen anything like this in my entire life." He tapped the screen, freezing the frame on an image of Sierra's hoof scooping a perfect arc of sand. "That's not an accident. That is a wild animal making a conscious choice to intervene. We have it on record." Elena's eyes filled with tears, a mixture of gratitude, pain, and awe. "She's going to change everything," she whispered, "the way people see these animals. She has to." Jonah carefully ejected the drive. He slid it into a shock-proof case, then immediately made a backup copy. This was too important to lose. "This doesn't go through local channels," he said, his voice hard. He looked at each of them, making sure they understood. "A man like Troy Callahan has friends in low places. This goes straight to the feds. We're not losing this." The radio on his hip crackled to life. "Pike, ambulance is 5 minutes out." The wail of a siren, faint at first, began to cut through the desert silence. Help was coming, real help. As the paramedics loaded them into the ambulance, strapping them to gurneys, starting IV lines, Jonah watched Sierra. She had loped alongside the vehicle for the first 100 yards, then peeled off, a gray ghost melting back into the heat. Back at the Dry Creek station, the plan came together quickly. They weren't victims anymore. They were hunters. Elena, despite being ordered to rest, was on her feet, a fire back in her eyes. "He'll go back for his traps," she said, her voice firm. "He'll try to erase any evidence he was ever there. We have to get him before he does." Jonah spread a map across a table. He knew the desert, and he knew how poachers thought. Callahan would use the old South Service Road, a forgotten track that was barely passable. He'd think no one would expect him to use it. He'd be wrong. Jonah got on the radio, dispatching his other rangers. One took up a sniper's position on a ridge overlooking the road, armed with a tranquilizer rifle. Another blocked the road with an ATV. Jonah and Elena stood in the open, waiting. They wanted Callahan to see them. They wanted him to stop. As dusk painted the desert in shades of gold and purple, they saw a plume of dust in the distance. A silver pickup truck came barreling down the road. It screeched to a halt just feet from the ATV, brake lights flaring. Troy Callahan jumped out of the truck, his face a mask of rage. "You got no right to block this road. You people think you own this desert." Elena stepped forward. "We own the law," she said, her voice as cold as steel. "And we have you on video burying 3 federal officers alive." Callahan's face went pale. The anger faltered. He was bluffing. He had to be. "You got nothing," he spat. "We have your license plate," Jonah said calmly. "We have the shovel. We have the pit. We have your truck on camera." He paused. "And we have a witness." And that's when it happened. From the ridge above them, a sound cut through the evening air. A high, clear whinny. Troy's head snapped up. On the crest of the dune, silhouetted against the dying sun, stood Sierra. The wind whipped through her mane. She stood there perfectly still, a silent, powerful accuser, looking down at the man who had tried to commit murder in her home. He was being watched, not by a machine this time, but by the wild itself. Jonah lifted his hand, not as a threat, but as a statement. "She pulled them out," he said, "and she watched you put them in." Callahan's face twisted in disbelief and fear. "It's a horse," he snarled, as if saying the words could make it true, could restore the order of the world he understood. He tensed, his eyes darting toward his truck, toward the possibility of a weapon. On the ridge, the ranger with the tranquilizer rifle made a subtle movement, the sunlight glinting off the barrel. "Don't," Jonah said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Turn around, hands on the hood." For a heart-stopping second, Troy Callahan teetered on the edge of a fatal mistake. Then, Sierra let out another call, sharper this time, a sound that seemed to bypass his anger and hit something older, something deeper. Primal fear. He sagged. The fight went out of him. In a swift, practiced motion, they had him in cuffs. The click of the metal echoed in the quiet desert. As they searched his truck, they found the evidence, dozens of cruel, steel-jawed traps, a blood-stained knife, and a notebook filled with dates, locations, and kill counts. It was the detailed ledger of a man who believed the wild was his to destroy. As they led him away, Troy looked up at the ridge one last time. "It's still just a horse," he muttered. Jonah followed his gaze to where Sierra had stood. She was gone, having melted back into the landscape. "That's the second mistake you made today," Jonah said quietly. "The first was thinking the desert would keep your secret." A week later, things at Dry Creek were returning to a fragile normal. The rangers were healing, their bodies and minds slowly mending. The story, however, was just beginning. Fueled by the incredible trail camera footage, it went viral. The video was everywhere: local news, national news, social media. People were captivated by the brutal ambush, but they were absolutely mesmerized by the impossible rescue. The image of Sierra and her herd, working together to dig the rangers out of a sandy grave, became an icon. Donations poured into wild Mustang preservation groups. A fourth-grade class sent a handmade poster with a drawing of a gray horse with a flowing, heroic mane. The world, it seemed, had fallen in love with a wild horse from the Blackhorn Desert. Sierra and her herd seemed to understand that something had changed. They started visiting the station. They would appear beyond the back fence at dusk, not asking for anything, just present. The rangers started leaving out apples, carrots, and hay for them. It wasn't an attempt to tame them. It was a thank you, an offering, a quiet acknowledgement of a debt that could never truly be repaid. One evening, Maya was sitting outside, watching the desert cool under a blue sky. Sierra stood just a few yards away, having finished her apple. Maya smiled, a real, genuine smile. "No one gets left behind," she said softly, speaking to the horse. "Not on our watch." Elena, standing in the doorway, heard her. She didn't say anything. She just leaned against the doorframe and watched as Sierra turned and led her herd back toward the hills, their silhouettes fading into the twilight. The desert was still a hard, unforgiving place, but now it held a new story. A story that proved the line between humans and the wild wasn't a wall, but a bridge. And sometimes, when all hope is lost, help comes from the most unexpected of places, galloping out of the heat haze like a miracle. Thank you for staying with us for this incredible story. What part of Sierra's rescue amazed you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this journey moved you, please give this video a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more unbelievable true stories. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. We'll see you next time.